Hey there! Welcome to the third part in my series on the newly released Note Air 4C. In this particular video, we're going to start to move more into the review of the device, and we're going to start off by showing my battery results and how that compares to other devices that I've measured, including the Note Air 3C. And then we're going to do a number of comparisons between the Note Air 4C and the Note Air 3C, but also comparing the Note Air 4C to the Boox Go 10.3. So we'll get a sense of how the device performs and how it performs relative to those two devices. And then we'll show a little bit of a Bluetooth keyboard and then kind of wrap things up. So I think you'll find this helpful in starting to understand the 4C a little bit better. It certainly has helped me get more into focus as we approach the final review. So let's go take a look at what I found out. Okay, so let's look at the results of the battery testing. On the table are all the devices that I've measured over the past year or so that are kind of in the 10 to 11 inch size range. And you'll notice that the Boox Note Air 4C is on the top bar, kind of highlighted in a light gray. And a few rows below that is the Boox Note Air 3C, highlighted in a darker gray for comparative purposes. All right, all the measurements you'll see on the table are measured in battery drain per hour. So how much of the battery drains for each hour with each of the activities measured in isolation. So we start with standby screen off, and this is when the device is on a kind of a sleep mode, where if you press the power button, it can turn on and you can start using the device usually between 2 to 5 seconds, depending on the device. And so what type of battery drain does the device experience by being in kind of the state of readiness? And for the Boox Note Air 4C, the rate is 0.13%, very similar to the results of the Note Air 3C, and really within the margin of error. So I'd say these devices are pretty much operating at about the same rate of drain. The next category is standby with the screen on. So this is when the screen is active and you can start interacting with the device at any time. Think of it like if you have a notepad on your desk and you want to start writing right away. This is the mode that you would use to do that. And the drain on this was 0.4%, which does stand among the best devices as well as the 3C. The final category on this table is around Wi-Fi, and this is having Wi-Fi on, but not necessarily downloading. In fact, I run the test where I make sure that all the downloads are refreshed before measuring. So it's really meant to measure the impact of just having Wi-Fi on in the background. And in the case of the 4C, it measures at 1.5%, which is an improvement over the 3C. Generally speaking, though, with the exception of the standby with the screen on, the measurement of the 4C is kind of in the middle or even toward the lower half compared to the other devices on the table. Next, we'll come up with front lighting, and we're going to measure this in two ways. First off, turning the device on in full cold front lighting, what kind of battery drain do you get just from the lighting itself? And the answer for the Note Air 4C is 7.1%, which is one of the higher values on the table. If you go to half front lighting, you can save a lot of battery time and you still get some pretty good illumination. So the measurement for that on the 4C is 3%. Both measures much higher than the 3C and generally higher than most of the devices on this table. That's not much of a surprise given how bright the front lighting is on the device. That's the trade-off. The brightness of the lighting comes with a cost of additional battery drain. Our final tests are around reading and writing. We'll start with reading, and this is a test where essentially I measure the battery drain either reading on the Kobo app or, if not available, the Kindle app. In this case, the Kobo app was available, and that battery drain was roughly 1.7% per hour, which is notably higher than the 3C. The last category is continuous note-taking, and this is an exercise where I start the clock and I literally just start writing. And I write for at least 10 minutes, and then I start checking the battery every 30 seconds to wait for the indicator to drop, and then that's how I measure the ultimate battery drain. So it's just a solid 10 minutes or more of writing with no breaks. And measuring it in that manner, the 4C had a 10.9% battery drain, which was slightly better than the Note Air 3C, and is kind of in the middle of the table, generally speaking. My overall assessment of the battery life for the 4C, well, first off, let's talk about it in contrast to the 3C. In most measurements, the 4C is a little bit worse than the 3C, although there were a couple exceptions to that. I would say, generally speaking, these two devices are in the ballpark with each other. The biggest difference was around front lighting, which clearly creates more drain on the 4C than it does on the 3C. Then, taking it from the perspective of all the other devices on the table, the 4C performs at average, maybe slightly below average. It's not great in battery life, but I wouldn't call it terrible either. The results are respectable. They're certainly nowhere near the worst performers on any of these tables, just slightly on the weaker side relative to the population as a whole. One of the questions that came up from a number of viewers is, how does the vibrancy of the colors differ between the two devices? So once again, we're doing a comparison. We have here on the left side, and you can tell because of the Boox logo here in orange, the 3C, and over here on the right is the 4C. And on both devices, we see the same kind of printer toner template. Let's take a quick look at our e-ink center settings. So you can see we're in optimal here. And if we scroll down, we're also in optimal here. So the same. Go ahead and do refreshes on both screens. Oops, let's get rid of that. There we go. Do refreshes on both screens. And here we go. I don't see tremendous differences between these two images, but there are a few things to note. The black lines look pretty similar to me. If you look at the red lines, you notice that it's kind of a solid red, and then it gets a little fainter. Here, that solid red color continues at least one more block, and then it starts to get fainter, so that's a slight difference there. You see the same thing with magenta, so kind of solid, then fades. Here it's solid, then you start seeing the fading. In a similar fashion, here it was blue. You see a dark blue, it gets a little bit lighter, then it really starts to fade. Here, the darkness kind of holds a little bit longer here in the middle. The cyan's pretty similar. I don't know if there's a huge difference there. Green, you'll notice that it's a solid green and that you can start to see it fade almost immediately. Here, it takes 2 blocks before it starts to fade. Yellow looks the most different to me in terms of the color. It seems to be a little bit darker across the board, a little bit lighter on this side, but the fading is about the same. And I don't see a huge difference. This block looks a little bit darker than this block, for example, but all in all, these are pretty minor differences. I mean, they're certainly not the same, but I can't really discern major significant differences in the vividness or accuracy of the color. Let me go ahead and swap this around just to see if the lighting is having any impact on those results. So now we see the 4C here on the left and the 3C on the right, and I don't think that the lighting really had much of a difference. Now, having said that, let's see what front lighting does. And we know, of course, it'll be brighter here on the 4C, but will that help with the colors and the vividness? All right, let's go ahead and refresh both screens. And, the same themes in that, the darker blocks continue longer and they start fading a little sooner over here. But I don't think that there's any other significant differences than when we didn't have front lighting on. I do think that the intensity of the front lighting on the 4C does favors. I think it makes the colors pop just a little bit more in general. It seems to have just a touch more definition. Like, let's look, for example, at this yellow bar on the outside. It just seems to have just a little bit more more definition with the 4C than the 3C, but it is certainly a very subtle difference. It's not significant, and I don't think that it's something that someone would generally pick up if just looking at one of the devices. I think if you just looked at the 3C or if you just looked at the 4C, you would feel like you're pretty much looking at the same image. One of the aspects that the 4C, which is again here on the right and the 3C on the left, one of the aspects of the 4C was supposed to be its larger amount of RAM and better processor. So the question is, do those things have an impact on performance, particularly the processor? So we're going to do a couple of quick tests just to show the performance differences between these two devices. Let's start off just by swiping on the main screen. So you can see they're both very snappy. I don't see any difference really between either of them. Let's go ahead then and start loading the Kobo app. I'm going to click both of these at the same time and we'll see how quickly they load. And here we go. Okay, slightly faster here on the 4C, but not by a huge margin. Let's go ahead and go into this book. Again, a slightly faster on the 4C, but not particularly different. Let's check our e-ink center settings. So we're on ultra fast here, and we're on ultra fast here as well. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what the page turning is like between the two. And of course, I'm tapping them both at the same time. Slight font difference between the two. The pages aren't necessarily identical, but they are similar. Yeah, I don't discern any type of difference in the performance. Let's go ahead and change that then to HD mode, which will take a little bit longer to turn pages on. All right, and let's see what the page turns are on HD mode. So of course we expect HD mode to take a little bit longer, although it's still under a second, it seems, on page turns for each device. But really no difference in performance that I can see. Very similar to each other. Okay, for another performance check, let's go ahead and launch Google News. So we'll go ahead and tap on those simultaneously. And actually slightly faster on the 3C, but not tremendously different. Let's go ahead and check our e-ink settings. We probably want to go with more of a balanced approach to get good images, but good scrolling at the same time. So there we are on balanced. And I don't want my shadows to get in the way, so I'm just going to go ahead and scroll on this first. Get a sense of what that scrolling is like. Okay, let's do it over here now. Let's see if I can scroll at the same time, see if you can discern a difference. Very similar in my experience. There might be a hair of an edge on the 4C, but I could just be imagining that as well. They both scroll fairly smoothly, and I don't know that there's there's certainly no significant difference, if there's any difference between these at all. One of the things I was asked to do is to compare the Boox Go 10.3, which we have here on the left, to the Boox Note Air 4C. And of course, the first thing that pops out is just how light the screen is on the 10.3 versus the 4C. And this is entirely because of the color layer on the 4C. There is no front lighting available on the 10C. So this is nothing but the ambient lighting coming onto the screen. Just for comparison, let's go ahead and look at full cold front lighting. And you can see when you pull full cold front lighting on, it definitely looks whiter on the 4C than it does on the Boox Go 10.3. So that is one advantage of having front lighting on this particular device. But, unfortunately, the downside of that, as noted earlier in the video, is there's significantly more battery drain on this device as a result of that front lighting. So let's go ahead and kind of look a little bit at the performance of these two devices, and we'll go ahead and launch Kobo just like we did with the 3C. Oops. There we go. And we'll launch them at the same time and see how that fares. Okay, it was different, but they ultimately landed at about the same point. Let's go ahead and go into this book. Okay, a little quicker on the 4C. Let's go ahead and check those e-ink centers. So here we've got HD. Let's actually go to ultra fast here. And let's do something similar over here. We'll just do speed as a rough equivalent. Okay, let's see what the performance is like between these two devices. Very similar. I can't really tell a difference between the two. Let's go ahead and look at HD mode. Which we'll do Regal, which is roughly equivalent to HD. Yeah, they both perform pretty much on par with each other. Not a lot of difference there. Let's go ahead and look at Google News then, see how that loads. Okay, we have a slightly higher DPI on this version than this version, but that's not particularly important for our purposes. Let's go ahead and check. So we are on balance mode here, and over here we will go on normal mode. That's closest to balanced. And let's take a look at the scrolling. Oops. So both have pretty good scrolling. Okay, a little bit of flashing on this one. That might be because of the mode I'm using. Let's go back to speed. See how that goes. Maybe a little bit smoother here. But not a tremendous difference here, meaning on the 4C, but not a tremendous difference between the two. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to another mode just to make sure we're doing a fair comparison here. Oh, that's terrible. We don't want that. That's A2 for scrolling pages. Okay, let's take a look at that. So this is A2 versus, what do we end up here? A2 versus balanced. And both are pretty responsive. Similar behavior. Okay, so not a lot of tremendous difference between these two devices in terms of performance, maybe an occasional edge with the 4C, but certainly nothing to write home about. One test I've started to do lately is try to measure if there's any impact on the magnetic covers on the device as you're drawing on the device. And there's two tests that I do for that. Both tests I conduct with the case on. The case isn't currently on the device, but these were both done with the case on. And the first test is a line test that we'll see here. And this is where I take a ruler and I just draw the line out. Now the lines themselves are not necessarily parallel to each other, but they're roughly parallel to each other. So that was not drawn with precision. But the key thing to focus on here is how wobbly are the lines? Are there these deviations that show any pull of the magnets on them? And I don't see any of that. Keep in mind that in the case, the magnets are predominantly over here and over here. You know, they're pretty far over here, so I wouldn't necessarily expect to see any type of deviation on this side. But if there was interference, I might expect it over here, and there's really no signs of interference on either side. In addition to that, I do a scribble test, which is here, where basically I just scribble in multiple directions to see if there's any dead spots on the screen, and I don't detect any. When you do have a dead spot, it usually appears like a circle, like a white circle where the writing won't go. It's very obvious, and there's certainly nothing obvious here. So the magnets are well designed, and they don't appear to interfere with the writing experience. One of the things that the Note Air 4C and other devices can do fairly well is connect to a Bluetooth keyboard and accept typing input. So let's go ahead and swipe down, and we're going to activate Bluetooth. And I've got my Bluetooth keyboard right here. I've already paired it, so I'm going to turn it on. And once it connects, you'll notice that the name underneath the Bluetooth symbol will reflect the device that it's connected to. So it's connecting right now. Give it a few seconds to find each other. Okay, and there it is. So what we can do then is go into the Notes application. I'm just going to go ahead and go into this text file. And let's swipe down and take a look at our e-ink center. And here we're on HD mode. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, a little choppy, could be better. Let's go ahead and switch that mode then to balance mode. Okay, much better. And even better if we switch to ultra fast. And there you have it. So typing with a keyboard is super easy, and it works best on ultra fast mode. Balance mode wasn't too bad either. There's just a small difference between the two. But definitely with HD mode, you get a lot more choppiness in the typing. But ultra fast works perfectly great. You can do it here in the text file. You can do it in a text box, in a notes file. You can have a Microsoft Word document up and type into that. And with the origami stand, you can actually have a nice typing experience, whether it's portrait or landscape. Okay, so that concludes this video. The last part of this series is then coming up, which will be my final verdict on this device. I think a lot of this video has kind of helped inform that final verdict, so that should be coming out fairly shortly, certainly within a week. And if there's any comments or questions, as always, pop those into the comments and I'll attempt to answer them. Be sure to like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day.